Greetings, fellow Slayers and newcomers alike. Today, we are creating the ultimate Goblin Slayer build in Baldur's Gate 3. This man is truly a Slayer in raw form, so much so he literally made it his name. Whether you like them or not, here at PURGE EVIL, goblins are strongly disliked, and so it just makes sense that Goblin Slayer himself will now officially join the party. To cover his resourcefulness, we will take Ranger. To cover his combat technique, we will take Fighter. And to cover his brutality, we will of course take Barbarian. The playstyle would generally be Goblin Slayer utilizing everything in his arsenal to destroy the enemy, from potions to poisons to bombs and anything in between. When he runs out of equipment, i.e. spell slots and throwables, or just gets low on health, he resorts to pure brutality in the form of Rage from Barbarian. For those of you that just want a general build path, consider subscribing before you click off, as this build will be 5 Ranger, 3 Fighter, and 3 Barbarian. The last level can be taken into Fighter or Barbarian. You can also view each level via the timestamps in the description. Leave a comment down below with any suggestions for future builds, and for access to the written version of Goblin Slayer as well as my full catalog of builds, consider visiting the Patreon where these lovely folk have gathered round. Thank you all for your support. You all are absolute legends, and may we set ablaze every goblin nest. Welcome to PURGE EVIL. Thank you for stopping by. Let's get into it. Character creation in level 1. Quick note, role-playing Goblin Slayer is not for the faint of heart. Consider taking a level into Barbarian at any point if you feel you need rage and resistance, but do also note, on honor mode, getting extra attack by level 5 is almost essential. With that being said, I will describe the safest build path. There are a few points in the build where you can choose between different class levels to take, and really the best choice is what would be most beneficial to you at that point in your playthrough. Goblin Slayer is all about resourcefulness. Regardless of how we get there, the end product should be what was stated earlier: 5 Ranger, 3 Fighter, and 3 Barbarian, one of those last 2 actually being level 4 for the feat. Now to begin, Goblin Slayer is a human, and we will take Folk Hero for the background as he does become one, and we're not able to change our background midway through the game to mimic that, so we will go ahead and take it here. For skills, make sure to take Stealth, Athletics, Insight, and Perception. We start the game naturally as a Ranger. Our favored enemy will be Bounty Hunter, which gives us investigation proficiency, as well as causing enemies to have disadvantage on our Ensnaring Strike saving throw. Even if you don't use Ensnaring Strike, I like having the investigation buff for Goblin Slayer flavor. For Natural Explorer, take Wasteland Wanderer Poison for poison resistance, as Goblin Slayer knows very well that goblins like to utilize poison, and so he is always prepared. And for stats, Goblin Slayer will lean more into a dex build, utilizing finesse weapons and crappy armor. Realistically, Goblin Slayer will utilize anything and everything in his immediate disposal to gore his enemies. With this, you can really headcanon any non-magical type of gear to be thematic. He is a crafty individual though, and will utilize stealth, so I believe the dexterity route is much more flavorful than the strength route. Strength at 14, dex at 16, constitution at 16, intelligence at 8, wisdom at 12, and charisma at 8. Level 2. At level 2 for fighting style, we will take dueling to keep the theme, as Goblin Slayer can usually be spotted with sword and board. This simply gives you a +2 bonus to damage rolls when wielding one-handed weapon. And for spells, first take Hunter's Mark for extra damage. This can be recast without expending a spell slot after the marked target has been killed. For the second spell, take Ensnaring Strike, which stops the target from being able to move, and they take 1d6 piercing damage every turn. With our quote-unquote spells and such like Ensnaring Strike, instead of vines, headcanon this to obviously be tools and equipment that Goblin Slayer has brought along the journey. Both of these spells require concentration, and so I would save Ensnaring Strike for tougher enemies, mainly just using Hunter's Mark a majority of the time. Alternatively, swap one of these spells out for Longstrider. Level 3. Now at level 3, we unlock our subclass, and this actually may vary depending on you as a player and your circumstances. Gloomstalker is by far the strongest subclass for the early game, and especially if you're playing solo. For the purposes of this video, and because Gloomstalker was involved in some of my previous builds, today we will take the Hunter subclass. If Goblin Slayer is in a party, Colossus Slayer is a decent option, as he will deal an extra 1d8 damage to enemies with less than full HP. It also works solo, but is better after you already have extra attack. If Goblin Slayer is solo, Horde Breaker is quite useful, as he will find himself surrounded at times, especially after breaking stealth. Of course, this works well in a party too. I like Horde Breaker the most out of the 3 options I laid out for the endgame version of Goblin Slayer. Gloomstalker will always be the best for the early game, however I do find Hunter to be more thematic, whether you take Colossus Slayer or Horde Breaker. For the spell, take Hail of Thorns or the previously mentioned Longstrider. Level 4. At Ranger 4, we take ability improvement to raise our dexterity by 2. If you don't care about min-max, Dungeon Delver is thematic, and I also like Defensive Duelist. Medium Armor Master is not worth it for this build, so stop looking at it. Level 5. Here at level 5, we take our final level into Ranger. This grants us extra attack and a spell, which will be Pass Without Trace for sneaking into monster nests. This basically gives you level 100 sneak, buffing your stealth checks by +10 for you and allies within 9 meters. Goblin Slayer is usually very calculated, and this will help him to plan his attack and stay out of sight. By this point, you've probably slain the goblins of Act 1, but you've caught wind of a Moonrise Towers, and there's a chance you'll find more goblins there. Time to move. Level 6. Now at level 6, we have 2 multi-class options. Option 1. If playing honor mode or solo with this build, I recommend taking Barbarian. So in case things get crazy, you kinda have a safety net and can rage, which gives you resistance to physical damage, granting you some much needed defense outside of stealth or AC. Option 2, if you feel you don't need Barbarian, go ahead and take Fighter with the defense fighting style. You can respec at Withers to have Fighter as your first level for Constitution proficiency, which greatly helps you to maintain concentration. If you choose this option, take Fighter to level 3 and then take Barbarian. Level 7. At level 7, if you took Barbarian, go ahead and multi-class yet again into Fighter, following the same steps as option 2 of level 6. Defense for fighting style, and respec at Withers for Fighter as your first level for Constitution proficiency. You also gain second wind for a self-heal. Level 8. At level 8, we have Fighter 2, unlocking Action Surge for double output once per short rest. Level 9. Now at level 9, we unlock our subclass, which will of course be Battle Master. Goblin Slayer has honed his skills and can now perform maneuvers, applying conditions to enemies and dealing extra damage. First, we take the almighty trip attack to prone enemies, leaving them open to attack. Second, we have menacing attack, because by this point our hero has basically gone from Goblin Slayer to Doom Slayer. This instills fear in the hearts of your foes, frightening them so they can't move and have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls. Lastly, we have Precision Attack, which adds the superiority dice roll to your next attack roll, essentially guaranteeing a successful hit. Use this when it is absolutely necessary to hit and you can't afford to miss. An honorable mention is Disarming Attack. Level 10. We have conquered Moonrise Towers and the leftover goblins that were there, but you can't ignore the absolute. Whatever it is, it allied with goblins, and any ally to a goblin deserves to die. Goblin Slayer makes his way to Baldur's Gate. At level 10, we move back over to Barbarian. This grants us Reckless Attack, which gives you advantage on your attack, but also gives enemies advantage against you. We also unlock the Danger Sense passive, so we now have advantage on dex saves against traps, spells, and surfaces, so long as we don't become blinded or incapacitated. Level 11. Moving on to level 11, we unlock our Barbarian subclass. Wild Heart Bear is quite good, though it's not very thematic, just something to keep in mind. With that being said, and for the purposes of this video, we will have to choose Berserker. This transforms rage into a frenzy, functioning the same but granting additional abilities, all being bonus actions. While frenzied, we can now make a frenzied strike, which is a regular attack as a bonus action. This adds a stack of strain, adding a -1 penalty to attack rolls for every stack. We also have enraged throw, in which your strength modifier is added to the damage and the thrown object has a chance to prone the target. This is a dex build, so consider popping a potion of Hill Giant strength when trying to utilize this to its fullest potential. Third, we can now use improvised melee weapon as a bonus action, which is actually quite fitting for Goblin Slayer. Level 12. Now for our final level of the build, you can choose between Fighter or Barbarian, either one granting us our second and last feat. Quick note, you can take Fighter 4 earlier instead of the Barbarian levels if you really want the second feat earlier. With this, to min-max, we can take Ability Improvement for a +2 Dexterity, capping it at 20. Alternatively, we can take Defensive Duelist for flavor. Whenever we're attacked with a melee attack, we can spend a reaction to add our proficiency bonus to our armor class, likely causing it to miss. Goblin Slayer is always on his toes, and so I think this is quite thematic, although it's probably best to just take the ability improvement. Here, remember that most medium armor imposes disadvantage on stealth checks, so consider wearing light armor when trying to sneak. It's okay to switch between the two according to the situation or depending on what gear you actually have. Goblin Slayer will utilize anything at his disposal, so you can't go wrong with really any gear setup. Gear like rings and amulets that have spells attached to them can be headcanon as equipment, like magic missile being darts or throwing knives of some sort. As Goblin Slayer, you're gonna have to get crafty. There is no definitive set of gear to aim for, rather just whatever works for the current circumstances. Locations of all gear can easily be found on the Baldur's Gate 3 wiki or on my Patreon. Okay, for Act 1 head, we have the Haste Helm, and for chest pieces, we have the Spider Silk Armor and the Drow Studded Leather Armor. I recommend going for the Drow Studded Leather Armor as soon as possible. You can also get the Adamantine Scale Mail, but do note that this is medium armor that imposes disadvantage on stealth checks. For gloves, we have the Gloves of the Growling Underdog, which are perfect for this build, especially if you use Hordebreaker. Then we have Fleet Fingers and Gloves of Hail of Thorns. For boots, we have Boots of Speed, and we also have Boots of Genial Striding. For amulets, we have the Moondrop Pendant and the Amulet of Branding. For rings, we have Crusher's Ring and the Ring of Protection. For shields, we have Safeguard Shield and the Glowing Shield. And for weapons, we have the Short Sword of First Blood. I recommend getting this as soon as possible. The Singing Sword, which isn't really thematic, but it is a finesse longsword, so I have to mention it. And then we have Larethian's Wrath, which is another long sword that has the finesse property. For ranged weapons, we have the Fire Stoker. This is particularly useful for Goblin Slayer, as it is rather common for him to light his enemies on fire. Then we have the Bow of Awareness, increasing initiative, and Gandrel's Aspiration, which gives you advantage against monstrosities. This goes for your melee attacks as well, not just the ranged attack. For Act 2 heads, first we have the Flawed Helldusk Helmet, and then we have the Circlet of Hunting, which I really like because if you use Hunter's Mark a lot, it gives you a plus 1d4 bonus to attack rolls against those creatures, which is basically a free bless. Then for cloaks, we have the Cloak of Protection and the Cloak of Cunning Broom. For chest, we have the Wanti Scale Mail, however you pronounce that. This is particularly useful as it is medium armor and does not impose disadvantage on stealth checks. It adds your full dexterity modifier to your armor class and gives you a +1 bonus to initiative. We also have the Sharpened Snare Cuirass. If you didn't take Bounty Hunter, this would help your ensnaring strike. And then we have Penumbral Armor. For gloves, we have Gloves of the Duelist and Janil's Gloves. For amulets, we have Surgeon's Subjugation Amulet and the Hammergrim Mist Amulet. For rings, we have Killer's Sweetheart and Ring of Free Action. For shields, we have the Gloomstrand Shield and the Sentinel Shield. And for swords, we have the Slicing Short Sword, the Render of Mind and Body, and the Sword of Lifestealing. And for ranged weapons, we have the Darkfire Shortbow, which gives you resistance to fire and cold damage, as well as giving you haste. Now for Act 3 heads, we have the Bone Spike Helmet and the Helmet of Grit. For cloaks, we have the Cloak of Displacement, For chest pieces, we have the elegant studded leather, the armor of agility, and if you're taking some weird route, maybe get the ballist armor. The armor of agility is basically the main chest piece that you want to aim for regardless for Goblin Slayer. For gloves, we have the legacy of the masters, the gauntlets of the war master, the martial exertion gloves, the unwanted masterwork gauntlets, and if you're feeling crazy like with the ballist armor, you can also get the crater flesh gloves. For boots, we have the boots of persistence. For amulets, we have the amulet of Baal, the amulet of greater health, and Khalid's gift, mainly for the aid spell. And if you want to exploit Helmet of Grit, make sure to use Belm, which gives you a bonus action regular weapon attack. And then we also have the Crimson Mischief. For ranged weapons, make sure to get the Hellfire Engine crossbow. Now, I usually talk about the endgame set of gear that I wear for these builds, but with Goblin Slayer, it really depends on your playstyle and what gear you actually have and where you're at. But typically, this is what I would wear: the Flawed Helldusk helmet, the Cloak of Protection, the Armor of Agility, Legacy of the Masters, Boots of Persistence, Amulet of Baal, Ring of Protection, Killer's Sweetheart, Lorethian's Wrath, but I actually change this out quite often, Safeguard Shield, and the Hellfire Engine crossbow, or more so the Darkfire shortbow if you need to use haste. If you made it to this point in the video, you are now obligated to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you thought this build was trash, you are now obligated to dislike the video and come up with something better in the comments. Both of you are now obligated to ring the bell so as to not miss out on future content. If you'd like to further support the cause and become a fellow Slayer of Purge Evil, the Patreon is linked down below, where you can support for as little as $1 a month and gain access to exclusive content, including all of my builds in written format, plus way more that will never become videos. This includes other games as well, fresh provisions in the pantry, and a new shiny sword for any Slayer to be. I got a lot more to share with you all in due time, and if you're still here, I just want to say thank you for stopping by. And until next time, Purge Evil.
Oh yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah, crown in my palm, but I ain't put it on. Yeah.